The morning arrived with an unsettling quietness that pressed against my eardrums like cotton wool. At 73 years old, I've learned to read silence the way others read newspapers, understanding its different textures and meanings. This particular silence felt wrong, felt heavy, felt like something fundamental had shifted while I slept. My eyes opened at their usual time, 5:30. No alarm needed after decades of the same routine. The ceiling above me was familiar, painted white with a small crack near the corner that I'd been meaning to have fixed. But something was missing. The sounds I'd grown accustomed to over 3 years of living here, the soft padding of small feet in the hallway, the distant murmur of a television cartoon, the rich aroma of coffee brewing downstairs, all absent. I pushed myself up slowly, feeling my joints protest with their usual morning complaints. My bathrobe hung where it always did, soft and worn, smelling faintly of the lavender I kept tucked in my dresser drawers. I wrapped it around myself and paused at my bedroom door, one hand on the cool brass handle, listening intently for any sign of life beyond. Nothing greeted me but more silence. The hallway stretched before me, empty and still. Sunlight streamed through the windows at the far end, creating golden rectangles on the hardwood floor. It should have felt warm and welcoming, this beautiful morning light, but instead it illuminated the emptiness, made it somehow more pronounced. I called out my son's name, then his wife's, hearing my voice sound small and uncertain in the vast quiet. No response came. My heart began its familiar rhythm of concern, not panic yet, just a slow recognition that something wasn't as it should be. The guest room door stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open to find beds made with military precision, untouched and cold. The stuffed animals my grandchildren always brought were nowhere to be seen. No scattered toys, no rumpled blankets, no evidence that anyone had slept here recently. My mind reached for logical explanations. Perhaps they'd risen early for some reason, gone out for fresh pastries or to catch the morning parade downtown. Yes, that must be it. They'd return any moment now, arms full of warm bread and excitement. I descended the stairs carefully, gripping the railing with both hands. These steps had always been steep, and I'd learned to respect my body's limitations. With each step down, I expected to hear the front door open, to hear their voices calling out greetings, explaining where they'd been. The silence persisted. The kitchen stopped me in my tracks. Everything was spotless, unnaturally so. On Thanksgiving morning, this room should have been alive with preparation. Bowls scattered across counters, ingredients waiting to be transformed into tradition. Instead, every surface gleamed clean and empty, as if no one planned to cook anything at all. I walked to the coffee maker and touched its side. Cold, completely cold. Michael always made the first pot. Knew I liked it strong and ready when I came downstairs. The absence of that simple gesture felt more significant than it should have. Through the kitchen window, the driveway stretched empty under the morning sun. Both vehicles gone, Michael's truck and Amanda's SUV, leaving only oil stains on the concrete where they usually parked. The sight made something tighten in my chest, a physical sensation of wrongness. Then I saw it. A piece of paper on the counter, folded neatly, held in place by the small turkey-shaped magnet I'd purchased years ago at a craft fair. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up, unfolding it with deliberate slowness. Amanda's handwriting flowed across the page in her characteristic neat script. The words were simple, direct, devastating. They'd decided to spend Thanksgiving in Hawaii. I wouldn't have liked the flight, they'd reasoned, so they thought it best to let me rest at home. They'd be back in a week. I read those words 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, as if repetition might change their meaning or reveal some hidden message I'd missed. But the meaning remained constant. They'd left, they'd made plans, booked flights, packed bags, traveled thousands of miles, all without a word to me. Not an invitation, not a conversation, not even a phone call. Just this note, this casual dismissal of my existence. The strange thing was, I didn't cry. I expected tears, expected that familiar burning in my eyes and tightness in my throat that precedes sobbing. Instead, I felt oddly calm, almost detached, as if I were observing this moment from outside my own body. I set the note back on the counter and moved through the motions of making coffee. My hands knew what to do without conscious thought, measuring grounds, pouring water, pressing buttons. The machine gurgled to life, and I watched it drip slowly into the pot, counting each drop like seconds on a clock. When the coffee was ready, I poured myself a cup, added cream the way I preferred, and carried it to the kitchen table. I sat in my usual chair, the one facing the window with a view of the bird feeder in the backyard. A cardinal landed as I watched, brilliant red against the pale morning sky, pecked at seeds for a moment, then flew away to wherever cardinals go. I sipped my coffee and allowed myself to think clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not about what I should feel or how a good mother would react, but about what was actually objectively true. The truth was this. I was sitting alone on Thanksgiving morning after my family had left for a tropical vacation without telling me. They'd left a note instead of having a conversation. They'd decided I wouldn't enjoy the flight, as if they knew better than I did what I would or wouldn't enjoy. I looked around the kitchen, really looked at it. The refrigerator I'd purchased when they said their old one wasn't adequate. The curtains I'd sewn by hand because Amanda wanted something more modern. The table where we'd shared countless meals, where I'd always made sure everyone else had seconds before taking any for myself, sitting there in that silent house with that note on the counter and that empty driveway outside. Something fundamental shifted inside me. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply started thinking, really thinking, about how I'd arrived at this particular moment. My mind drifted back 3 years to when Harold passed away. We'd been married for 48 years, nearly half a century of partnership and companionship. They said he went peacefully in his sleep, called it a blessing, and perhaps it was. But peaceful or not, his absence left a void in my life that seemed impossible to fill. Our little house, the one we'd bought when Michael was just a baby, suddenly felt simultaneously too large and too confining. I remember standing in our bedroom, weeks after the funeral, staring at Harold's clothes still hanging in the closet, pressed and waiting as if he might return to wear them. That's when Michael started coming around more frequently. Daily phone calls, unannounced visits with groceries I hadn't requested, constant checking in. At first, his concern felt comforting. It felt good to know someone cared, that I wasn't completely alone in navigating grief. One evening he sat me down at this very kitchen table and told me I shouldn't be alone. He said it wasn't healthy, that he'd been talking with Amanda, that they had extra space in their home. He made it sound like I'd be helping them as much as they'd be helping me. Amanda was working full-time. Daycare was expensive, wouldn't it be wonderful to wake up to the sound of grandchildren, to be surrounded by family again? The way he framed it made refusal seem selfish. I thought about those quiet mornings ahead of me, making coffee for one, eating dinner alone while the television provided artificial companionship. The prospect of being surrounded by life and laughter and purpose felt like exactly what I needed. So I said yes. What Michael didn't mention immediately was that accepting his invitation would require financial assistance. They needed help with a down payment on a bigger house. Their current rental was too small, he explained, but if we pooled our resources, we could get something really nice. Something with room for everyone. I had the money. Harold had been careful with our savings. The life insurance had been generous, and I had no other pressing needs for those funds. Michael called it an investment in our family's future. I wrote the check without hesitation, without negotiation, without understanding what I was actually purchasing. The first few months were everything Michael had promised. I woke to children's laughter, was consulted about recipes, sat with Michael in the evenings listening to stories about his workday. I felt useful again, necessary, valued. I took care of the grandchildren while Michael and Amanda worked. I packed lunches, helped with homework, read bedtime stories, became an integral part of the household machinery. When Amanda mentioned the washing machine was broken, I bought a new one. When Michael expressed concern about high utility bills, I quietly took them over. It felt good to help, to be the kind of mother and grandmother who could ease their burdens. They called me a blessing repeatedly, and I wore that word like armor against loneliness. But somewhere in that second year, something shifted. The request for help evolved into expectations. The gratitude transformed into assumptions. When I mentioned visiting my friend Dorothy for a weekend, Amanda looked genuinely surprised and asked who would watch the children. When I suggested I was too tired one evening to cook dinner, Michael seemed annoyed, saying they'd been counting on me. That phrase, counting on you, appeared more and more frequently. I began feeling less like family and more like staff, but I told myself I was being oversensitive. They were busy, stressed, working hard. Of course they relied on me. That's what families do. The moment that should have woken me came about 6 months ago. I wasn't feeling well, just a spring cold, and had gone to lie down early. My bedroom door was slightly open when I heard Amanda on the phone in the hallway. Her voice carried that particular tone people use when venting to friends. She was talking about me, about how I meant well but was so set in my ways, how everything had to be done my way, how sometimes it was easier to just work around me. Then came the words that froze me in place. We can't ask her to leave. Michael would never forgive himself. Plus, she helps with so much. The bills, the kids. We'd be lost without her money. Her money, not her. Her money. She continued talking about wanting her house back, about missing their own space, as if I were an intrusion, rather than an invited guest. As if this weren't the house I'd helped purchase. I didn't confront her. I filed those words away in some quiet corner of my mind and continued as before, because what else could I do? Where else would I go? I convinced myself I'd misunderstood, that she was having a bad day, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But after that conversation, I started noticing other things. Plans made without asking if I wanted to join. The kitchen reorganized after I cooked. Everything moved to where Amanda preferred. Michael talking about his house and his mortgage even though my name was on half the paperwork and I'd paid far more than half the bills. Now, sitting at this kitchen table on Thanksgiving morning, holding my coffee and staring at that note, all those memories arranged themselves into a pattern I could no longer ignore. I hadn't been invited to live with them because they loved me. I'd been invited because I was useful. And the moment I might have become inconvenient, they'd left me behind without a second thought. I finished my coffee and stood slowly. For 3 years I'd convinced myself this was my home. But it wasn't. It was their house, one I'd been paying. For a while pretending I belonged, I picked up that note again, tracing my fingers over Amanda's confident handwriting. The sentence "you wouldn't have liked the flight" bothered me more than the rest. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so casually certain, as if she knew me well enough to make that decision without asking. Had I ever said I didn't like flying? I couldn't remember. Harold and I had flown to visit his sister in Arizona years ago. It was fine. A little cramped perhaps, but nothing I couldn't handle. But that wasn't really the point. The point was they'd made a choice. A family vacation, and somewhere in all that planning and excitement about beaches and resorts, they'd decided I didn't fit. I folded the note and set it down. My hands felt steady. My mind felt clear. I walked through the living room slowly, taking inventory. The 65-inch television mounted on the wall, the one Michael had wanted for the Super Bowl 2 years ago. I'd bought it as a Christmas gift. The cream-colored sofa that looked beautiful but wasn't particularly comfortable. The one Amanda had seen in a catalog and fallen in love with. $3,000. The coffee table, the end tables, the lamps, the bookshelf, all purchased by me. I moved into the kitchen, opening cabinets methodically. The dishes, the glasses, the copper pot set Amanda had admired at a kitchen store. I'd bought those for her birthday. The refrigerator with its stainless steel finish and French doors. The washer and dryer in the laundry room. The patio furniture on the back deck. The lawnmower in the garage. I'd paid for all of it, not because they'd directly asked, but because they'd mentioned needs, expressed wishes, made comments about how nice it would be to have this or that. And I'd stepped in, opened my wallet, solved the problem, believing that's what love looked like. I walked back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed. On my nightstand was a photograph of Harold, taken maybe 10 years before he died. He was smiling at something outside the frame, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he laughed. "What would you think about all this?" I asked his picture softly. Harold had always been practical, generous but clear-eyed. He would have seen what was happening long before I did. He probably would have pulled me aside months ago and asked me gently why I was working so hard to buy affection. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a blue folder. I'd always been organized, the type of person who kept receipts and warranty cards filed away neatly. Harold used to tease me about it, calling me meticulous. Inside the folder were pages and pages of receipts, every major purchase I'd made since moving into this house. Television, sofa, appliances, furniture. I even had the receipt for the down payment on the house itself, the cashier's check with my signature at the bottom. I flipped through them slowly, remembering each moment when I'd thought I was helping, when I'd believed I was being a good mother, a valued member of the family. Looking at them now, they felt different. They felt like proof. I closed the folder and held it in my lap, feeling its weight. Not heavy, but substantial, important. "It's all mine anyway," I whispered to the empty room. The words surprised me, not because they weren't true, but because saying them out loud made something shift inside my chest, something that had been tight for a very long time. I stood and walked to my closet, pulling out my phone. I didn't use it much, but I knew how to search for what I needed. I typed slowly. "Moving company near me." Several results appeared. I scrolled through reviews and ratings. One had particularly good comments. Family-owned, people said. Professional. Respectful. I tapped the phone number. It rang 3 times before someone answered with a friendly voice. "Good morning. Prestige Moving Services. How can I help you?" I took a breath. "Good morning. I need to schedule a move tomorrow if possible." There was a brief pause. "Tomorrow? That's Thanksgiving, ma'am. We do work holidays, but there's an additional fee." "That's fine," I said, my voice calm and certain. "I can pay whatever it costs." "All right then. Can I get your name and address?" I gave him the information, speaking clearly, taking my time. "And how much are we moving? Full house or just a few items?" I looked around my bedroom, then thought of the living room, the kitchen, the garage. "Quite a bit," I said. "I'll have a list ready for you when you arrive." "Perfect. We can have a crew there by 8 in the morning. Does that work?" "That works beautifully," I said. We finished the details and I hung up. The house was still quiet around me, but the silence felt different now. Not empty, not sad, just waiting. I walked to my desk and pulled out a notepad and pen. At the top of the first page I wrote, "Items to move." Then I started writing every single thing I'd ever paid for, every piece of this house that belonged to me, beginning with that television and working my way through 3 years of purchases, 3 years of trying to buy love, 3 years of being useful instead of valued. By the time I finished, my hand was cramping and 3 pages were covered in my neat handwriting. But I had my list. I had my proof. And tomorrow, I would take back everything that was mine.